What if events went differently? What if Gwen Stacy died in Spider-Man 3? So welcome back to the channel, guys. It's been a while since we ended up doing a fan fiction. It's been like 3 weeks or more, and I'm finally back doing the fan fictions, and we're going to be grinding them out because fan fictions, it's almost been an entire year since I've been doing them, so I got a few that, I really want to bring out to you guys that haven't been requested. So, we got some secret projects in the works, and it's going to be really fun to bring that to you guys. But anyways, let's get into the fan fiction here. And what if events went differently? What if Gwen died during her fall in Spider-Man 3? Events would be going out as until the same, until this time something happened. Spider-Man was too far away from the crane that was being brought down. He was going as fast as he could, but he didn't know if he had enough time left. Everything was slipping in front of his eyes. He could see he wasn't going to make it. She was falling too fast, and he tried everything. He did his last one-ditch effort, and he used his webs, but something was off. She wasn't moving when he caught her in the web. The web ended up breaking her neck. He brought her down, and it was her lifeless body on the ground. She wasn't moving. A crowd of people started rushing in, and they saw Spider-Man kneeling down with her body. And Captain Stacy, he came in and he couldn't believe his eyes. Eddie Brock was also there yelling at Spider-Man, and Captain Stacy would pull out a gun and start firing at Spider-Man, but Spider-Man would dodge all of the bullets, and he would eventually jump out of the way and slowly rush off. And, he would rush off, land onto a building, and rip his mask off, and he would start crying like he couldn't believe that he failed the city. And, Captain Stacy and Eddie Brock were crying in shock, and the ambulance came to take her body away. Peter would ask himself what happened back there. It was all his fault that he let Gwen die because he wasn't fast enough, and it wasn't even an evil supervillain that had gotten anyone killed. It was him. He would go back into his place, and he would actually talk to MJ about it, but she wasn't really helping him. He didn't really want to talk about it, so he ends up leaving. He gets some air, and he would actually see, he would go to the Daily Bugle, and he would see a Daily Bugle printing that would say, Spider-Man murderer ? And it would have a Spider-Man picture, with the print with Gwen's body dead, with Spider-Man holding her. And Peter couldn't believe how far Jonah went with exploiting Gwen's death to get to Spider-Man. He couldn't believe it. So he would take the paper, and he would say a big New York funeral, being held to the public. And, there'd be a huge funeral that would be going on in this timeline instead of the key to the city thing. So he would see that in the newspaper, and Spider-Man would be very angry and frustrated. So he would eventually move to the Daily Bugle. He would start rushing there. He was already there in time, and it'd be during the day. He would see J. Jonah pretty much there with all the staff, and Brock would be arguing with Jameson about the print, and he would tell Jonah, like, you can't be doing this, and he would actually punch J. Jonah Jameson in the face, and then Spider-Man would rush crawling on top, and he would actually drop down and see Brock and Jonah fighting, and Spider-Man would pin Jonah up to a wall, and he would start explaining he was trying to save her. Eddie Brock would actually agree with Spider-Man, and he would tell Jonah that, I saw Spider-Man try to save, Gwen, and, he tried all he could. And Spider-Man would tell Jonah to stop, making prints and, putting a bad taste in his mouth, and he actually would tell Jonah that he was getting sick of him getting called a menace. And Jonah would actually try to punch Spider-Man in the face, but he would actually yell at like menace and stuff, and Spider-Man would dodge it, and Jonah he would hit his hand off a wall, breaking a glass frame that actually had like Spider-Man on it. And Spider-Man would be standing there just looking at him, and Jonah would be charging at him, and Spider-Man would dodge it, and he would actually spear him into a wall. Like Spider-Man would spear Jonah on the ground, and everyone was looking in shock. The cops have already arrived, and Captain Stacy was there, and they made it in time, and they would tell Spider-Man to freeze, and then J. Jonah would take a chair in the actual area, and he would throw it at Spider-Man, but Spider-Man dodged it and smashed it back at him, and Jonah went flying, and it hit the police. Like Jonah went flying into the police, and Jonah, he was on the ground, and you could hear like coughing and stuff, and Jonah was taking a heart attack, and Spider-Man couldn't believe it. Spider-Man would yell at the cops, telling them that he was the only one who could bring him to the hospital in time, and he would take Jonah to the hospital, and Jonah was hospitalized and he almost ended up dying, and Spider-Man would say to himself, like, why does he keep screwing up, and like, why did he do that? He lashed out. His anger was controlling him almost. So he would go back and he'd go to sleep, and he would have nightmares of his past mistakes, and he would have nightmares of him fighting himself, but he was all in black, and it was all going on in his mind, and everything went white, and he saw himself with blonde hair and a red and blue uniform. He was fighting cops and stuff, and he didn't know what was going on, and he actually woke up, and he could see that he was on top of a giant skyscraper with a different suit. There was a tarantula on his suit, and he ended up getting the symbiote in this universe early. He ended up getting it earlier, and he knew that he had to be at the funeral, so he went back, and he was testing out his new found abilities and powers, and he couldn't believe the power. He was so strong, more stronger than he's ever been before. And the next day, Peter would wake up, and he would go with MJ, and he would go with Harry to the funeral, and there would be speeches and people would be talking, and there would be posters of Spider-Man saying killer, and some of the city would be split on if Spider-Man was a hero or if Spider-Man was a villain. And since J. Jonah was hospitalized, he didn't get Peter and Brock to actually feud for a picture of Spider-Man, so they would both be on good terms in this universe, and Peter would see Eddie and Captain Stacy, and he would pretty much say his condolences for them and for what happened, and they would be talking to him for a bit during the funeral, and Peter would hear a buzz, and he knew something was going on, but he didn't know what was going on, and Captain Stacy would pretty much tell Peter to come see him after, because it was something very important that he had to tell him and Aunt May. So he would agree, and he told Peter to go down there like really fast, like when the funeral was pretty much done and over with. And what actually happens here is Peter hears a loud noise, and all he hears is people yelling out "get down" and stuff, and it was the Sandman. He would start fighting cops, but then he would move to get to that bank truck, and Peter would suit up, but it would be the symbiote suit that would go onto him when he changed. So Spider-Man was actually in his red and blue suit, but then it was like a symbiote suit of the red and blue suit, and then it would actually turn to black. So Spider-Man would battle Sandman just like in the original timeline, and he would get away, and Peter would look around, and people would be pointing at him saying he got a new suit, and he would look different, and then Spider-Man would change the suit back into the red and blue suit, kind of like the Web of Shadows video game. And in front of everyone's eyes, they couldn't believe what was going on. He would leave, and then he would go to Aunt May to Captain Stacy's office, and he would pretty much explain that Flint Marko was the real killer, and that he murdered Uncle Ben. And then things play out the same, but he would have the symbiote during this event, so he'd be getting flashbacks of him killing Dennis Carradine and getting flashbacks of him fighting Sandman. And he would take the mugshot and crumple it up, and he would slam it on the ground, and then he would say sorry to Captain Stacy and Aunt May, and then he would storm out of there, smashing the door in half. And then he would leave. He would then go outside, crying, swinging into his apartment, and he would hear a knock on the door, and it was MJ, and she would ask him how he was holding up with like Gwen, and finding out about Uncle Ben's real killer. And he would tell her that he was trying, but like he needed to get revenge. He needed to get revenge because he had the power to do it. And she was like, what are you talking about? You have the power to get revenge. Don't you already have powers? And Peter would turn into the symbiote, and it was like him with like a symbiote, like he would wear black clothes, but then the symbiote would go off as tendrils, exposing himself, and they would all be moving around, and she would scream, asking Peter, like, what is this? Like, what are these things? And Peter would say, they're my new powers, my new found abilities, And MJ would be scared of it, and Peter was slowly fading because of how long the suit was corrupting his mind. And he would say that this suit is giving him everything he needs, and he was taking the pain away from it, and it was actually blocking the pain, kind of like antidepressants, So MJ would say, if this thing's alive, and Peter would say, it doesn't matter if this is a alien symbiote or whatever it is, I need to get Marko, and I need to use this power to get to him. So, he would actually then leave, and Spider-Man would be swinging, and, he would actually see the Sandman's tracks, and Eddie Brock was there. He was taking pictures of the Sandman, and, Spider-Man then ended up showing up, and, Eddie would actually explain, like, don't go down there, Sandman's there, and Spider-Man would pretty much tell Eddie that it's too dangerous and that, he has to do this, and he pretty much says, like, move aside, man. So Eddie actually moves aside, and what actually happens here is, like, Eddie would pretty much explain he was trying to find the Sandman because, it ruined Gwen Stacy's funeral, and he was getting really mad, so he wanted his revenge, and Spider-Man would tell Brock that, he would get his revenge later because he has unfinished business with him. And then he would swing into the depths of the subway system, and Spider-Man wouldn't use stealth. He would go full-on fight mode, and he would fight Sandman. He would kick him, and near the end of the water, because now we're going into the original timeline of the fight, and instead of this time, Sandman would get kicked into the water, and he would actually start fighting him. And, when he's in the water, Sandman would start screaming and stuff, and he would be like, who are you? And, he was about to die, and then Spider-Man would reveal himself and say, I'm Venom. And, it was crazy because Eddie would walk in, and he would be down there looking at what just happened, and, you would see Venom pretty much standing there, and Sandman's, like, trying to save himself, and Eddie just starts running because he couldn't believe that he saw, like, a big giant Venom and Sandman down there. So, Spider-Man was losing control, and then Sandman eventually would drown and die, and Spider-Man's losing control of the suit, and it was getting to be late for him, like, to really come back from this, and, he wasn't being responsible with his newfound powers, and, he was paying the price for it. He felt overwhelmed, and it was taking control, and he would then be controlled by the symbiote, so then he would start swinging as Venom around town, and everything would go black. He was back at the apartment, and he thought maybe it was just a dream until he heard the radio, and, it was Eddie's voice saying Spider-Man had killed a robber at the subway last night, and that he had pics to prove it, and that, it was going to be on the newspaper. And then what we actually have is we have Peter, he gets out of bed and he goes to the door, and he looks at a Daily Bugle newspaper that says Spider-Man murders thug, and then it actually has, him in his black suit as Venom. And, his eyes go black, and he starts turning into Venom, and things start to spice up in our storyline where, Peter would walk and hear J. Jonah talking to Eddie, and, Eddie would get his job back because of the pictures that he ended up getting for Jonah for the newspaper. And Peter would walk up to Jonah and Eddie, and, he'd give them a weird smile, and the symbiote, like, you could see it in his eyes that something was, something wasn't right here, and it was taking over. And just as he was about to do something really bad, he ended up getting a flashback of, papers with him with the Menace stuff, and then he would start smiling, and then all of a sudden you would hear glass break and people screaming like crazy, and it was the new Goblin. He was awaiting Peter, and, his memories, he flashed back and saw, like, what was going on. And, just in the nick of time before, he was able to not do something horrible to Eddie and Jonah, Spider-Man ends up getting into a fight with the new Goblin, and Harry gets all of his, memories back earlier in our storyline, and Harry would grab Peter's neck, and, he would lift him outside of the building, and, they would be fighting in the air, and he would be getting choked outside of the building. And, Peter would smile at Harry, and Harry would be like, what the heck are you doing? And symbiote would start going around Harry's neck, and it would start strangling Harry, and then Spider-Man turned into Venom, and he stabbed him right in the gut with massive claws, and they would be falling, and then everything would actually go black, and, you would see Venom on the ground, with symbiote everywhere, and then Harry was there. Harry was crawling, he had a ton of broken bones, and Peter with the symbiote would pretty much go, and he would walk, and he would end up leaving as fast as he could. So in this universe, Peter actually kills Harry earlier, and Spider-Man would go to the church late at night when it was raining. He needed to get forgiveness, like, he didn't know what was going on, so he was at that area, like our original timeline, and the bell would go off, and, it would make the symbiote start to fall off, kind of like water, and it wasn't working fully, and he knew he needed to do something before he was consumed by it, and, he would have flashbacks of Gwen dying, and, the suit, and, like, Flint Marko, and Uncle Ben getting killed, and there was so much stuff going on in his mind, and he would see it would cut to his mind, and he would see Red Spider-Man fighting the symbiote Spider-Man, and it was a fight in his mind, and he was fighting himself, and he was trying to take back control, but he was losing the battle. He fought himself, and then in his mind, he would start punching the symbiote version of himself so hard that he broke free of the chains from the symbiote, and the symbiote would actually kick back, letting Peter go. But the symbiote was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it was something that we've never seen before. And he had his ripped red suit on. He was crawling as the symbiote was getting huge, but Spider-Man was too weak to really get back to his feet. And as this was happening, Captain Stacy would actually walk into the church, like crying and stuff, trying to get forgiveness on like everything that was going on. And he would see what was going on up there because he could hear noises, and it was the symbiote, and it was Spider-Man ripping the symbiote off and stuff. And he knew that he was Venom, so Captain Stacy ended up getting his walkie-talkie, and he would say like, call for backup, to tell the head office who Spider-Man really was. And he would start to run to get into his car, and Spider-Man would look to see him running as he was ripping the symbiote off and stuff, and he would punch it, and Spider-Man would punch the symbiote, but the symbiote dodged it, and it went back onto his hand, and he was screaming like, no, not again, like I can't go through this again, like I literally just ripped the symbiote off. And it would go back into his mind, and he would use the 616 symbiote suit, and it was really buff. And he would go into his mind, and he would be talking to the symbiote pretty much that he would want to make a deal with the symbiote that, like, you don't consume me, like I'll be your host, but you can't consume my mind or feed me any of this horrible stuff that you've been doing to me. So the symbiote makes a deal with Peter Parker as the host, and he takes back control, and he's like, oh my god, like I have control of the symbiote, like it's going to do anything I want now. So the symbiote's not controlling him, and Spider-Man ends up controlling the symbiote. And he's like, I can't believe it worked, it finally worked. And he would actually run, like Captain Stacy would be running into the car, but Spider-Man would jump onto the car, and then he would ask, where are you going, Captain Stacy? And he would actually throw him out of the car, and that's where we're going to end the Spider-Man fan fiction of what if Spider-Man couldn't save Gwen in Spider-Man 3. So let me know in the comments down below what you guys think about this. This was a really difficult what if to make, but I'm really glad that I ended up making it. It's pretty much been requested for like 6 months, so I really wanted to do this one. But anyways, as always, let me know. Do make sure to subscribe, like, share, and turn your notifications on so you and your friends are all up to date with the latest content. But anyways, as always, peace out.